Good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here. My name is Benjamin Ensor. I'm a Vice President and Research Director at Forrester Research, which is a global research company based in the United States, but with offices across North America, Europe, and increasingly Asia. And I'd like to talk to you today about marketing to empowered consumers and whether your company and your social policies are social or antisocial. And to do that, I want to address three questions. Firstly, how are technologies like mobility and social media changing marketing? How should marketers respond to those changes? And how can companies empower their employees to respond to the changing needs of consumers? So let's start by looking at how technologies like mobility and social media are changing marketing. The big problem is that, unfortunately, many people view marketing as irrelevant. Now, this data here is drawn from the United States, but we find much the same when we look in every country. That when you ask people, how much do you agree with statements about advertising, their responses are predominantly negative. People say that the ads they see are not relevant to their personal needs and wants. The direct mail they receive is not relevant. And the marketing emails are even worse. And we find this across every market, that people say that marketing is mostly irrelevant to them. Only a handful say that they appreciate marketing. So you have quite a big problem. Your customers actually don't like your messages. Instead, people tend to trust what they know. And again, we find this in every culture. And it's not surprising. Human beings are social animals. Relationships are important in every society. And it turns out that it's exactly the same when it comes to media. People tend to trust the opinions of other people. The best possible source of information is typically a recommendation from a friend or a family member. But people also trust consumer products, ratings, and reviews. They trust information from people they've never met more than they trust information from you, marketers. I'm guessing that most of you are marketers. I imagine a few of you aren't, but I guess most of you are marketers. They trust expert ratings and reviews. And they trust all of these sources more than they trust the marketing media owned by retailers, financial services companies. More than they trust your websites, and more than they trust traditional media like print magazines, radio, TV, and so on. So this is both the promise and the challenge of social media. The challenge is that customers are increasingly using social media to find information about goods and services directly from the people they trust, other consumers. The opportunity is for you and your company to harness that to make your marketing more effective, because people trust information they receive from their friends and family. So if you can persuade other people to market your products and services, you'll have much more success than if you rely entirely on traditional media. Because what we're seeing is there are four technologies we call groundswell technologies that are empowering customers with more information than ever before. Social technologies make it easier to find information, to hear the opinions of other customers. Mobile technologies mean that information is always on, and it's great that there's a phone ringing even now, someone getting information even as I speak. Video is a fantastic way of communicating. Video has really changed the way people consume content on the internet over the past few years. And finally, cloud computing, slightly less obviously, is making it much easier for new businesses to start up. It's making it easier for new businesses to get access to servers and hardware, the computing resources they need to serve customers on the internet. So what's happening is your brand is increasingly what your customers experience, not what you say it is. So before social media, companies could run advertising campaigns. You could say, we are the best company in our business in the world. And nobody really knew whether that was true or not. But now, people can just go online and see what other customers think of you. So you're losing control of the message through social media. And instead of your brand being what you say it is. Increasingly, your brand is what other customers experience. So the interactions that your customers have with you every day define what your brand is. So what this means is social media and mobile technologies are changing customer behavior. We're not going to go back to the world we were in before. Younger people, in particular, are very active users of social and mobile technologies. You probably didn't need me to tell you that. What social media does is it amplifies and it brings transparency. It makes it much easier for people to find out what it's really like to be a customer of your company. It means that your brand becomes what your customers experience, not what you say it is. And mobility accelerates that because it brings immediacy. People can look at their mobile devices right now. So people, whereas in the past people sometimes had to wait until the evening to look at social media, now people in your stores, and people interacting with you can check you out immediately. So how should marketers respond to this? What do you do about these changes in your profession? We believe your survival, ultimately, as successful marketers, depends on how well you adapt. These are huge and significant changes to the way in which marketing works. And the companies that get this are thriving, and the companies that don't are starting to struggle. What we believe marketers need to do is to listen and react intelligently to customers. Your customers are telling you things. They're sending you messages every day about how well you're doing, about your goods, your services, what it's like to be a customer. Smart companies are using social media data. They're listening to what customers are saying about them. They're gathering it in. They're explicitly asking their customers. They're using that data to inform their strategy. That then drives their marketing, which then inspires further online discussion. So they're creating a cycle of social intelligence where they're listening and responding to customers rather than the old model of just blasting messages out to customers and shouting ever louder at them. Instead, companies are listening and changing their messages based on how customers are responding. The problem is that many companies worry about how to use social media. We've surveyed here 95 mostly American companies about their use of social media. And we find that even among big established companies, senior marketers have a number of concerns about using social media, which will apply all the more if you work in smaller companies. One of the big ones is lack of resources. A lot of companies simply don't have enough people. They don't know how to measure social media. They worry about negative feedback. This is one of the complaints we hear most often is, but people will say nasty things about me, which is true, they will. But they'll say it whether you are active in social media or not. So you can't stop that. Lack of budget, legal issues, company bureaucracy, and so on. These are particularly difficult issues for companies in highly regulated industries like healthcare or financial services, where you have to be a lot more careful about what you can do. So what we're finding is that there are companies that are in very different stages of maturity. I apologize, there's quite a lot on this slide, so sorry for that. But what we see is companies go through 5 levels of social maturity. There are some companies that are completely dormant. They're anti-social. They're not doing anything at all in social media. Then we find a large group of companies that are still testing social media. They have individuals or departments, people who believe in social media, but it's not really widespread through the organization. Then you start to see management, senior management starts to get involved, starts to realize the significance of this. And then you get to what we call the coordinating stage, before you start shifting into the final stages, where you're scaling and optimizing and empowering your employees to respond to customers. So I want you to have a think as I talk through this about where your company sits on this. And notice the various different dimensions. So if the defining characteristic is here in this column, you need to think about how much experience do you have with social media? What's your culture? And how committed are you? Do you have support from senior management? Does your chief executive understand the power of social media? Or is this still very much something that's being driven from the ground up by perhaps some of you here in the room, but nobody else in your company really gets it and really understands? And so I'd like you to start thinking about what do we need to do to take the next step? What's the next step for your company? How can you gradually move up the ladder? How do you get more employees responding to customers through social media? How do you start establishing governance so that you've got standards, processes, guidelines, so that you're controlling the way in which you're using social media, rather than just, in the early stages where it's just individual employees doing their best, but not necessarily in a coordinated way. We also see companies, as they get more sophisticated with social media, starting to commit more resources. We see companies going from having nobody at all in charge of social media to having full-time employees working on social media whose role is to organize the overall company's response. Again, obviously it depends on the size of the company. We see processes coming in where companies move from having no social processes at all to having task-oriented tasks or cross-media teams, far more professional approach to social media. And finally, and perhaps most importantly of all, we see more and more sophisticated measurement coming in as companies start trying to understand what's the impact of our social activities today. How are we improving our customer relationships? Are we listening to and hearing about problems faster? Are we able to take action sooner? Can we see that we're getting fans on Facebook, that it's in some way driving further sales for the company? And the measurement is critical, because if you're not measuring it, you're not going to get the resources. So make sure that if you're doing nothing else, you're measuring the impact of social media on your company, because you'll never persuade senior executives to give you budget if you haven't got metrics in place. And we often find that marketers sometimes fall down on that because it's not something that always comes naturally to marketers. So how do you empower your employees to act? Our view at Forrester is that you need what we call empowered employees, what we call heroes, because only an empowered worker can serve an empowered customer. If you expect your employees to be able to respond to customers who've got immediate access to information about your company, who've got more information than they ever had before about who you are, who your competitors are, what your other companies think of you, you've got to empower your employees with the same kinds of information. So you need to think hard about what information do we give, what tools do we give our frontline employees. I don't know which industries you're in. Perhaps you're in travel, perhaps you're in retail, perhaps you're in business to business. But all of you have frontline employees, employees whose jobs are working directly with customers. What information do you give them? How much help do you give them to respond to customers' needs? We believe that firms need to set up what we call a hero compact. Now, heroes are what we call highly empowered, resourceful operatives. And it's a bit of a trick to come up with a nice term. But the idea is that heroes are employees who understand the importance of social media. Heroes are the employees who are out there every day trying to do what's best for their companies. Your job, I'm guessing many of you are managers or in marketing, your job is to help them do that, to give them the tools and the platforms, to make it easy for them to respond to customers who've got problems through social media. And IT's job is to give them the technologies they need. So you need to set up the frameworks, the guidelines, the policies, the processes that make it easier for your employees to respond to unhappy customers or happy customers through social media. So think about how you're going to work differently. Marketing is changing fundamentally. What does that mean for the way your company is organized? Because what we're finding is that many of our clients are going through substantial overhauls of all of their internal processes and practices, because the way in which customers behave now in 2012 is completely different to the way in which customers were behaving 20 years ago. So companies have to go through this change, because what we're finding is as the pace of innovation accelerates, your customers are adopting new technologies very fast, and companies are often changing much more slowly. So increasingly we're finding that customers are more sophisticated than the companies they're dealing with. And they're getting very frustrated because the companies aren't able to respond as quickly as they expect. A good example is when you try and cross channels during a process. Let's say you're trying to buy something and you research it on a website and then you try and phone the company to buy the item, and they can't cope because they've got separate silos. It's completely different departments. Customers are far more sophisticated than some of the companies they're dealing with, and that becomes a major business risk. So if you're a manager and you're working with customer-facing employees, make sure that you're embracing new technologies. You can't fight these technologies. You can't resist it. You need to embrace and accept that these new technologies are coming. Yes, set guidelines, set policies about what your employees can do, what social tools they're allowed to use within the company, but embrace those technologies. Encourage experimentation. Trust your employees to do what's best for the company. So let them try new things. If those new things don't work, stop them. But encourage experimentation. Commit to collaboration. We see in many leading companies, they're using social media internally to encourage the companies to be more efficient, particularly big companies. Some of you may be from companies with 10, 20, 30,000 employees. In those kind of companies, it's crucial that you use social media to help connect like-minded people. You've probably got some brilliant people within your company who just don't know each other, and if you can just enable them to speak to each other, they might come up with new products, new services. And we see many leading companies using collaboration systems. And use councils to spread best practices. Set up a social media governance council to set rules and share ideas. So to summarize, empowered customers, more potent than ever, are a marketing channel. You need to think about how do we harness our customers to promote our brand, to promote our products and services to other customers. Because remember, customers trust other customers more than they trust any other source of media. Companies need to make fundamental changes to keep pace with the changing customer behavior. Marketers need to work across roles and departments to develop and implement a social media strategy for their companies. So this isn't just about the marketing department. This is about your product departments, all of your channels, your technology, manufacturing. As marketers, you need to work across the whole company. This isn't just a marketing problem. This is a whole company problem. And you need to be working with people across the company to help them understand how your customers are changing and what your customers really want and need. Give your workers technology freedom, support for experiments, collaboration tools, and councils for best practices. And ultimately, you've got to work to fix the broken customer experiences that damage your brand. However good you are at marketing, if other parts of your company are letting your customers down, no marketing message is going to cover it up. So you need to identify and help to fix the problems that are causing customers to be unhappy or become disloyal in the first place. That's quite a summary of a lot of research, but I hope I've given you some useful ideas that you can apply directly in your own roles to thinking about whether your company is social or antisocial. I've drawn on some Forrester research. If you're interested, you can look some of it up. Thank you very much indeed.